Well, it is a terrific perspectives today that we have. Of course, your host, as always, is Asma Silva. But Edina Lekovic is with us. You know her certainly as a Muslim spokesperson, have seen her most likely on TV or other places as well. And her Meeting the Moment podcast is something that we can listen to as well. She joins us now from her home, and we're pleased that she is here. And you two have already spoken, so I'm kind of the odd man out here, so I'll turn it over to you, Asma, to start the show.
Well, we have spoken. Actually, I learned from her. I took one of her communications consulting courses. It was a kind of a workshop, a weekend workshop, and I met with her. And I said, you've been on all these major newscasts, CNN, NBC, and she's always been the Muslim spokesperson. And I thought, what a great person to have on our show, and a perspective to get as a Muslim woman who's a convert coming into, the media industry, representing Muslims of the United States.
Boy, absolutely. And of course, we're here at WCCA TV in the heart of Worcester, right in downtown. Why don't I, if I could, just start with a question for you. How does one become a Muslim spokesperson? Were you sought out? Did you kind of put yourself out there?
That's a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that, actually. So one, let me clarify that I was actually born Muslim. But I was, my family's Muslim, but I chose to be Muslim when I was around 19, 20 years old. So I'm somewhere in the middle. And how does one become a spokesperson? Well, my original dream was to become a journalist. And it was a dream that was born when I was a little girl who was one of those kids who my parents only let us watch like an hour of television a week. And so the exception was the evening news. And I fell in love with Peter Jennings and fell in love with the power of a story to connect me to somebody on the other side of the world and on the other side of town. And that's been the through line in my life ever since. So I wanted to pursue broadcast journalism. I was a college journalism student, one of the top college newspapers in the country at UCLA. But college also happened to be the time when I sort of rediscovered my Islam, and also decided to start wearing a hijab or to cover my hair. So when I graduated and started pursuing journalism jobs or broadcast journalism jobs back in 1999, I was told point blank that I was not going to work in front of the camera wearing a headscarf. The times were different. I'm proud to say that just in the last year, we have the first broadcast journalist for a local TV station in Indiana. But that wasn't a possibility back then. So that's what forced me to think about, well, how do I want to parlay my talent and my passion? And that ended up a few steps later with me getting recruited to work for an American Muslim advocacy organization called the Muslim Public Affairs Council. And so I spent, a good decade from 2004 to 2014 working as the communications director, engaging with media, doing media interviews, and doing a whole lot of community empowerment and public speaking in the process.
Was it an easy decision to say, no, this is who I am, so I will pursue other avenues? Or was there a moment where you said, I really liked Peter Jennings, I'd really like to be on the evening news sometime, maybe I can compromise here?
Yeah. I was 22 years old, and my faith and my conviction were pretty ramrod straight, I gotta say, probably more than they are today. So at the time, it was sort of an open shut case. I had enough faith to think, okay, if this isn't the path, then another path will emerge, or we'll find another path. And I was lucky to be raised by parents who also always showed me that that there is a path. If you can pave it, then that might be just the way that you need to do it.
Asma, I don't know if I've ever talked to you about this. You may have had some of these moments as well, I'm sure, in your life.
Yes, and similar to Edina, I too, I called it a convert, but I too chose to be Muslim and chose to do different things. And yes, like she said, you do need to have some support in your family and friends to be able to do these variety of things, even after choosing to be a certain faith or a certain religion that might not be so popular.
Back in 1999. Of course, one thing that I will say, and then I know that you want to talk about some of the issues certainly that you cover in the podcast. The podcast is fascinating, the way that those are taking off to me now, because, and I'm going to go back to your Peter Jennings example, we all had this communal experience. We all sat down at the same time And, whether you were a Jennings guy or a Brokaw guy or
Right.
Dan Rather or whatever it was, right, we all watched the evening news for a half hour at night and got our news as a nation. We were kind
the
of
same
gathered
time.
around the TV at
Around
the same time. Now everything is so fractured. I go home, I watch, if I like MSNBC, you like Fox, whatever it is, you're watching something, and you could watch it 24 hours if you wanted, or you're seeking out a podcast where people have similar views and are speaking to you through there. Lots changed in that 20 years. And it seems as if it's more fractured. Is that how do you sort of find your audience, bring them together, get your message out?
You're absolutely right, and I'm so glad you raised that. But for me, 20 years later, I think it's extraordinary that I don't have to rely on the gatekeepers to give me permission anymore. Back then, it came down to a handful of hiring directors at local stations, plus their equivalents on the national level, and they either said yes or no to you, and that was it, right? And you could apply for jobs in TV, in newspapers, in radio, and yeah, that was pretty much it, right? And so now you fast forward, and like the growth of the internet, as well as social media platforms, and now podcasting, alongside YouTube, I think that the podcasting platforms are such a creative revolution, or a revolution for creatives, you might say, because for somebody like me, like I said, I've been very used to being a voice on behalf of a community for a long time, and being able to start this podcast with the support I received from being a fellow with the On Being Project allowed me to launch my own project, launch my own platform, and without anybody's permission. That if I could scrap it together, all you can be a creative and upload your material and get the word out. And you don't have to rely on anyone else. And it's been quite a journey, especially for me as an individual, to reclaim my personal voice outside of a community voice and talk about the kinds of issues that I care about, and intersections between issues of faith and politics and identity and spirituality and gender and a whole host of things, and to be able to do it on my own terms. So I'm really grateful that I live in this time and place, because 20 years ago it felt very limited what the possibilities were. Now it's exponential. You might not, I don't have a goal of hitting the top 10 on the Apple podcast chart, but I'm thrilled that I have at this stage about 500 to 1,000 listeners for every episode, and that's an auditorium full of people, on an every other week basis in my case. So I'm grateful to have this platform.
So my curiosity is, you started this before what I would say the height of Islamophobia. How have some of these interviews and questions changed over the last 20 years?
So my podcast actually just started this year. So I've put out 11 episodes, and the concept of meeting the moment is that we don't get to choose the moments that challenge us or define us always, but we do get to choose how we respond to those moments. And so how do we find opportunities within crises? And that is inspired by my decade of work in activism, is that out of every crisis that I have seen and that I've had to work to organize in response to, I've also seen tremendous new opportunities arise because people found a way to make that possible. So each episode, I talk to somebody I admire about how they've been able to do that in their own life. And I'm particularly intrigued by people who are innovators or trailblazers, right? Who don't see a space for themselves and somehow carve out a space for themselves. So whether that's Krista Tippett, who's a religion reporter with NPR, who ended up creating her own show, and then a real life project associated with that, or Hassan Minhaj, who's a South Asian Muslim comic, most famous from The Daily Show recently, who's now getting his own show on Netflix, or whether it's a woman like Glenetta Pope, a African-American mom of 4 who I met here in Los Angeles, and whose life was touched by gun violence. And we had a conversation, a heart-to-heart, as moms and as advocates for the issues that each of us care about. So it's been really moving to be able to connect to people again on that level of story, and to be able to the same thing I knew to be true at 8 years old is coming to life for me every 2 weeks this year. And I think that people are hungry for it. That's what's really exciting about it. Not just hungry for my podcast, but they're hungry for positive content, right? Content that is uplifting and empowering, especially in the political climate that we're in, that it just feels so doom and gloom. that we need that kind of fuel to be able to meet the moment in our own lives.
It does seem a little doom and gloom sometimes today. I mean, the
Ooh.
partisanship sure seems as if it has reached new heights. But through 20 years, what's that? End of Clinton, and then Bush, and then Obama. How has it changed with each of those presidents? I mean, if we had been speaking under George W. Bush, would you said, "Oh boy, or is it different? I mean, is it really different with President Trump?
Sure, it is really different. So my career started under the Bush administration, and it was right on the cusp of 9/11. So most of my adult life has been in the aftermath of 9/11, and those years working with under the Bush administration and with our fellow Americans essentially in the aftermath of 9/11 to get our stories out. It was pretty awful. And at that time, again, going back to the gatekeepers we just talked about, the media climate was so different. The mainstream media spent most of its time screaming about where were the moderate Muslims and why aren't Muslims condemning terrorism, and here we were, those moderate, mainstream American Muslims trying to get ourselves heard, but they wouldn't take us seriously. It was a really challenging time, and the rhetoric out of the Bush administration seemed appalling at the time, although if we put that in contrast with this administration, I miss the Bush administration, and those are words that I never thought
I would
come
say
out
those
of my
words
mouth.
myself.
The fact that President Bush visited a mosque just 3 weeks after the 9/11 attacks to say that we're not at war with Islam, we're at war with terrorists, didn't seem powerful at the time. But now we know from studies that have been done that in the 3 weeks after President Bush did that, hate crimes against Arabs and Muslims went down by a significant amount. And after candidate Trump called for a total ban on Muslims, in the weeks subsequent after that, hate crimes against Arabs and Muslims went up. And so we know that there's a relationship between political rhetoric and the lives of everyday people. So the Bush administration was tough because, again, we had the Patriot Act, we had the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, we had the black sites, we had Abu Ghraib. I mean, we had Gitmo, there were so many catastrophes, and we had a string of domestic terror attacks that we were constantly in response mode to. The Obama administration was a new day. It was truly a new dawn in many ways because of the level of interest and engagement from that administration. That administration looked at American Muslim organizations as partners, as solution creators, and it was an entirely different administration to work with. Still frustrating at times, certainly, but the climate was different, and the level of interest was different. At that time, though, the media climate still hadn't changed that much. What was new was social media, but it was also a time when you remember the Ground Zero mosque controversy. Yeah. I think that sort of epitomized the flavor of Islamophobia during the Obama administration. In addition to now President Trump's assertions that President Obama wasn't born, in the United States, right? That whole birther controversy. I think that both of those controversies really paint to what the Islamophobia picture was under the Obama administration. And President Obama himself, largely, while he spoke supportively and inclusively of American Muslims, his first visit to an American mosque took place 7 years into his presidency because of the optics that were involved and because of the accusations that continue to be out there. So it's complicated. It's certainly complicated. And now under this administration, there really is no engagement with the administration because the administration is not interested. I think that the silver lining out of this administration is that there has never been more support for American Muslims than there is today, counterintuitively, because some people have been able to really have a wake-up call because of President Trump. Last year, actually, one survey found that public approval towards American Muslims was at the highest rate ever, which was 70%. And I think that a large part of that, I mean, usually it's like 50-50. So for most of the years since 9/11, it's gone between 45% and 55%, whether there's a positive or negative vibe towards Muslims. Right now, we've got the highest approval ratings and probably the highest hatred ratings too. But it's truly a unique time because We have two American Muslim women probably on their way to Congress after November, one from Michigan, one from Minnesota. We have an American Muslim supermodel, Halima Aden from Minnesota, who's a Somali refugee who wears a hijab and is running, is walking the runways. We have Ibtihaj Muhammad, who's an Olympian fencer. It's really an extraordinary time in so many ways, but it's also dizzying because it's a flurry of positive and negative all at once.
So with all the obstacles and rocky roads and challenges that you've just talked about over the past 20 years, what has been one of the questions when you were interviewed that you would say was the most alarming? Like you were just shocked about how could someone even possibly think of asking me this question? Difficult question.
It is a difficult question. Well, I can't think of getting asked a very specific question, but I will say that there was as we're recalling those Bush years, there were years when, especially when I did Fox News, but also on CNN, where I was constantly questioned about the loyalty of American Muslims, right? Like it was one form or another of, it's really nice what you have to say, but why should we believe you, right? Like this getting treated as the exception rather than the norm. Right. And that showed up in a whole variety of questions, but that was often the perception that we were fighting back against. You with my fair skin and blue eyes, I'm often mistaken for a convert rather than the former Yugoslavian roots that my family has, and I think that sometimes has contributed to people thinking that somehow I speak for white Muslims or this sort of liberal, the false assumptions that people make or the false connections are hard to account for. But I think that what the most powerful thing that I've learned over the years is that the greatest tool that we have at our disposal as American Muslims is not the facts or the figures or the scripture. It's our stories as American Muslims. It goes right back to what I learned, as an 8-year-old kid watching Peter Jennings. It goes back to us opening up about our lives and being willing to talk about what it's like to grow up Muslim and talk about the challenges. And that requires a lot of vulnerability. And that's part of what we talked about during the workshop that you and I were together for, was I think that one of the greatest challenges we have as American Muslims is feeling safe enough to be vulnerable, to be willing to open ourselves up and not assume that Islamophobia is awaiting us around every corner. And that's really hard when you're part of a targeted community. And I say that recognizing my white privilege, right? Like I'm not South Asian. The anniversary of 9/11 was a few days ago, and my sister and I were going to meet up for a hike. And she texted me the night before and said, her husband said, "It's 9/11. Are you sure you want to be in a public place? Out on a hiking trail, the two of you with your head wraps." And I just thought, it didn't even occur to me, didn't even think twice, because I don't think most people assume I'm Muslim. With the way I wrap my scarf and with white skin, I know the level of privilege that I own. It's a different situation if somebody has darker skin, has an accent, any number of things. In fact, it's African American women who wear hijab that are one of the most frequent targets of hate crimes. So it's really talk about how intersectionality, hits those who are already hit harder.
Yeah, I have my own stories of, white privilege when, my own husband, who may not understand what white privilege really is because he's so used to it. And sometimes I have to point it out in different incidences. But you see what happened, the difference between my treatment versus your treatment. And
you've even said, though, that after 9/11, Asma, that because of the Indian heritage, it didn't, you were seeing some behavior towards Muslims who were Middle Eastern that you weren't experiencing.
I wasn't experiencing it. So it was kind of my privilege of not being Arab at that time, or didn't look Arab. And when it changed to, after the San Bernardino, it changed to back to the Indian subcontinent, also being part of that discrimination. And then I started feeling the difference. But I went through that to feel the difference. But a lot of people, I don't think, feel that necessarily. I mean, they might understand it intellectually, but I don't think they truly go through and experience it to understand it, what it really means emotionally, and to be able to identify it when it happens.
Right. Well, I do want to just quickly tell the story because of what you said, Edina, the way in which Asima and I met. So I was doing a morning show, 50,000 watt station, and we were getting exactly the calls that you were describing. Well, where are the Muslim voices? You know, there's nobody will ever come out, right? So I call over, and to be honest, my memory is that when I called over to the mosque, it was sort of like, thank you, but we don't want anything to do with that. We're not going to. We want to keep a low profile, so no, we're not going to come on the show. And somehow, Asima, you found out, and
because you found the article that was in the newspaper.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
And
You had gone out,
right.
and so I reached out to you, and Ahmed came, and you came and spoke on the show. And so, I mean, and this is what I want to bring, because I think it's an interesting phenomenon. So, call after call after call, you won't hear these moderate Muslim voices, you won't hear this. Muslim women aren't allowed to speak. Blah. So here comes this Muslim woman who now spends an hour with us on the show. Not a single call. Not a single call. The next 10 minutes after Asima leaves, there's a part in the Quran where Muslims are able to lie to you because you're not Muslim and you were taken in and you were hoodwinked, but not a single call to actually speak to you directly that day.
Right, and the reason why I asked the question, Edina, of what I said was, what was the hardest question you ever got, was actually coming from my experience on Hank's show. That was my first time being in media, really, honestly. It was the first time being on a radio show or a TV show. And the questions that I got, and when I was coming in, I actually turned on your show, and I had heard some of the callers while I was driving in. And gosh darn it, was I scared. Because I did not expect, honestly, because where I come from, even though I came from a pretty white town, I did not expect such, hatred coming out of some of those callers. And driving in, I said, wow, what kind of questions am I going to get when I get on the show? So I was really coming in thinking, what am I supposed to expect? But walking out, I had the attitude of, well, that wasn't so bad. And people who listened, my friends and family who listened, came back to me and said, how did you not lose your temper? How did you keep so calm? And all I could think about was, but it wasn't so bad. I don't know why you guys think I should have been upset. And then I decided and I realized that Muslims, and I don't know if you will agree with this, Edina, that Muslims, I believe, have kind of a domestic violence syndrome when it comes to their religion and how other people view them. We walk out thinking, I'm still breathing, I wasn't hurt, I'm still in one piece, everything is fine. But outsiders looking in are looking at you going, if that was me, that is not considered appropriate.
Yeah.
It was rude. It was discriminatory.
Well, I would say that to me, as I think about it, one of the things that I was aware of at the time, and I wasn't sure how else to handle it. Of course, was that it was so very condescending, and that goes back to something that Edina said as well. I mean, so the questions that you were getting from CNN and Fox all kind of framed it in the same way. And the questions that were either emailed in or even that I was asking, I think were all sort of framed in that same way. But I do feel that you came with the mindset of, so let's keep our cool, change some minds, and instead of saying, gee, that's condescending, I will patiently answer it. And I like to think that
actually,
then
I didn't
gets
take
you
it as
to,
condescending.
right,
That's
to
the
this,
thing.
to
I
this
did
day.
not
Isn't
take it as
see,
that.
yeah,
I took
even
it
at the
as,
time, I was a
I'm
little
just happy
worried.
someone's asking and giving me a chance to respond instead
Right,
of
like,
just.
let's actually talk about it.
Yeah, let's actually talk about it. Yep. So, I mean, I that's why I was asking that question, is what did you feel was the most alarming question? My thing was when they told me, when you had said, what do you say to people when they say, take your God and go back to your homeland? And I thought to myself, going, where do I go? I'm from here. Like, where do I go?
Well, we also, I definitely, let's get back to Edina, because I mean, the things that I remember about that too was, people who had clearly gone to Wikipedia or somewhere on the internet and had pulled out things about, it says in the Quran that we're gonna, we're gonna lop this off, or we're gonna do that, or we're gonna stone you in the street, and do we want that to be happening in the streets of Holden? And it's like, I really don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon in the streets of Holden, but okay, somebody did.
So, Sister Edina, we only have like a couple of minutes left, but wanted to know, what would you like to share with our viewers in the sense of, with all your experience that you've had, when somebody listens to you on the news, or any other Muslim spokesperson on the news, or any other minority spokesperson on the news, what should they go home with? What should they think about while they're listening to that perspective?
Oh, Asma, the big questions. I think what I said before is really the point that I try to drive home to anybody who does media these days, whether they're Muslim or not, is that media is a vehicle to help us tell our stories. And, just like, I live in LA and we work with Hollywood sometimes, and they say in Hollywood that, for scriptwriters, that the more specific a story you can write, the more general it appeals, right? And it's the specificity that people can relate to on some level. And so I really urge people to not try to just be the smartest person in the room, but to be the most, be the most connective person as much as possible. I think being in media situations, it makes it particularly hard to feel like, sharing any part of your story is appropriate or convincing. But I have found that is the most affecting and convincing thing, because even when I've done Fox News, frankly, Fox News National, I should say, the emails that I have gotten afterwards usually have something to do with my tone or some part of my story, or that's what they latch onto, is not the facts and the figures, for anybody who bothers to engage. And I think that's where we have the greatest power to push curiosity more, because look at what's going on in our country right now. This is, I feel like as an American Muslim that I have more in common with my fellow Americans today than I ever have, because so many more of us are just concerned deeply about the soul of our country in a way that I sometimes have felt alone in the past, or felt siloed. So I really urge people to be willing to be vulnerable and to share parts of their story, and to say, like, this is what my experience is growing up as a Muslim. I don't know 100% about Islam. Do you, as a Christian or a Jew, right? Like, or as a Buddhist? No. So I can share what I do know and what my actual experience has been. And I think that for people who are outside of that experience, your job is to listen and to ask curious questions, and to take "I don't know" as an answer, like not as a cop out. So I hope that folks reach out and get to know their Muslim neighbors or their Muslim coworkers, and ask some curious, open-ended questions.
That brings us to the very end of this Perspectives.
Yes.
So thank you so much for having joined us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.